Hello again, and welcome to part 2 of the build log series featuring the Corsair Carbide 330R Blackout Edition. I am of course Rigger M71. If you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend watching that video first. I may put a link in the description. However, if you're only interested in the 330R itself and don't feel like watching me remove components from an old case, then you've got the right video. In the last part we unboxed the 330R as well as removed all the hardware from my Antec Sonata. Now we're finally ready to start putting everything into the new case. So if everyone's ready, let's roll the titles and get started. We begin by placing the empty 330R on the table, which makes sense because we probably won't get very far without that. A brief inspection with the side panel removed reveals that this is indeed a nice case. The interior is painted completely black to match the exterior. Another immediately apparent feature is the 120mm fan mounted at the back for exhaust. A closer look shows the bundle of cables used for connecting the various front devices as well as the fan controller connector. At the bottom of the case are ventilation holes for the power supply intake, and underneath that is a removable dust filter held on with small magnets. Here's a quick shot of the side panel. It's well insulated with sound dampening material. Both side panels are held on with thumb screws, however they are the non-captive variety. I'll just have to make sure not to lose them. Moving to the front and opening the door reveals a large dust filter, as well as 3 5¼ inch bays. Directly above those is a small 3-speed switch used for fan control. Up to 3 fans can be hooked to this using the included internal connector. The front door itself is insulated with the same sound dampening material found on the side panel. Removing the dust filter is surprisingly simple and reveals the included 140mm intake fan. The fan sits directly in line with the graphics card and should help with cooling there. There's also space provided below for an extra fan. You can use either 140mm or 120mm fans here and in any combination you want. This is a feature I really like and will prove useful later in the video. Toward the top front reveals 2 USB 3 ports, a headphone and microphone jack, as well as reset, hard drive light, and power combined into one solid plastic switch. I would have liked to see 2 USB 2 ports in addition to the USB 3, but since this is 2 more ports than I had available on the front of my old case, I can't complain too much. I've seen a few complaints online about the solid plastic switch for power and reset, but I actually like that everything is conveniently located in the same area. At the top of the case is a removable magnetic panel. This covers mounts for 2 140mm or 120mm fans, similar to the front. This can also be used to mount a large radiator. The case is easily suited for water cooling setups. Lastly, we have a shot of the back. Here we can see the cutout for the I/O panel, as well as 3 holes below the exhaust fan. These can be punched out for routing water cooling tubes or any other thing your brain can come up with. There are 7 expansion slots, as well as a standard cutout at the bottom for a power supply. Now that we've seen all sides of the 330R, we can start putting components inside. To start things off, let's place the motherboard, making sure we've snapped in the I/O cover first. I forgot to do that on several occasions and ended up having to unscrew the board. The 330R motherboard tray features a small guide peg for one of the holes, as well as raised mounts for the screws. That's right, no standoffs needed here. You simply screw the board down directly to the tray using the included screws. It's pretty easy stuff. It's worth mentioning that there is a large cutout in the tray for aftermarket heatsinks, but since ours is already attached, we won't be dealing with that. Next on the list is plugging in the graphics card. My R7-260X is a double-height card, so we need to remove 2 of the slot covers, as well as use 2 screws to secure it. There is plenty of space for cards much longer than mine. In fact, the entire length of the case is available due to the fact that the drive bays don't extend past the PCI Express slot. Now that the motherboard is in, we can move on to mounting the power supply. It's supported by 4 metal protrusions at the bottom of the case. The only thing that bugged me was that there were no pads to dampen vibration. I remedied this by cutting several pieces of electrical tape and sticking them to the top of the protrusions, or whatever they are. You can see my little modification here. It may not make any difference one way or the other, but it won't hurt either. The supply is then screwed in from the back of the case, like most every other one I've seen. This is actually the first case I've owned with a bottom-mounted power supply. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but it seems to be the norm at this point. Let's move on to the hard drives. The mounting trays are similar to the ones I used in my old case, except they're plastic and the drives are held in place with pins on the sides as opposed to being screwed in from the bottom. The idea is that you simply bend the tray back a little and insert the drive. I had a hell of a time getting the first drive into the tray, and I can't really explain why. The second drive snapped in fine. Not a big deal unless you plan on swapping drives often. I believe SSDs are actually screwed into the tray, but I didn't have one to try. Here's a somewhat mediocre close-up of the drive bays inside the case. There are 4 included, which is more than enough for me. Next we have my optical drive. This is a pretty standard installation. You simply remove the front bay cover and insert the drive. Although you can still screw the drive into the bay, the case actually holds it in place fairly well with the latch mechanism at the side. You simply pull the latch out if you need to remove it. The last component we have to install is an extra fan in the front. I already had several of these Fractal Design Silent Series 120mm fans and decided it would be a good idea to put one in the 330R. It will fit directly below the 140mm and should help a little with cooling my hard drives. Unfortunately, when I was screwing it into the front with the included metal screws, I got a little carried away with the screwdriver and ended up hearing a cracking sound at one of the corners. Fortunately, it didn't seem to affect anything, and the fan remained firmly attached to the case. I simply backed off the screwdriver and called it good. Next time, I'll be more careful. All that's really left is to plug in any remaining cables, such as the fan controller, USB ports, and front switches to the motherboard. It's also at this point that I try to double check that all serial ATA cables and power connectors are firmly in place. You can see here that I tried to use the included holes and space behind the motherboard to hide as many cables as possible. I also attempted to zip tie anything together that I could to keep things looking clean. I've seen complaints online about the lack of rubber grommets on the motherboard tray holes. While that would have been nice, the fact that this case has no window really makes it less of an issue. Regardless, this is probably the most tidy case I've ever put together, although I'm sure some cable master could do a better job than I did. Here we see the computer with the rest of my setup. It runs great and is extremely quiet despite having 2 extra fans than I had before. It is a bit taller and longer than my Sonata and does stick off the edge of the desk a little, however it sits just fine and isn't a real issue. I call this the monolith shot because it reminded me of the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I wanted to play the theme from the movie here, but I figured I'd probably get flagged for copyright. So just try to imagine it in your head. So I guess that's it, folks. That wasn't terribly difficult, was it? As for the 330R, I think I can recommend it to anyone looking for a good silent case. Corsair makes a number of similar cases, so be sure to check those out if the 330R isn't exactly your cup of tea. Regardless, I'm definitely happy with it. I hope everyone enjoyed this video, and as always, you can help me out by hitting the like or subscribe button if you did. You can also leave a comment below if you have something to say about the Corsair 330R or this review. So until next time, take care, and of course, have fun.